A question asked courageously, answered honestly, and lived authentically can change your whole life. For me, that question was, how can I use what I have, what I love, and what I know to bless the lives of others? The School for Good Living and this podcast are one answer to that question. Hi, I'm Brian Miller. I know that the world can work for everyone, but that it won't until it works for you. I've created this to help you make the difference you were born to make. It's a series of conversations with thought leaders who are moving humanity forward. And in each episode, I explore their lives and the work they do. I also ask them to break down how they've gotten their books written, published, and read. This podcast is all about exploring the magic and mystery, and sometimes the misery, of the creative process. So if you have a mission, a message, and the motivation to share it, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the School for Good Living. Hey, welcome back to part 2 of my interview with Stephen Post.
And lo and behold, this was after finishing up at the University of Chicago. So I was there for 2 years. And then I got an opportunity to go to teach philosophy, believe it or not, at Fordham University in the Tarrytown campus. And they wanted me to teach phenomenology of love and positive emotions, kindness, forgiveness, gratitude. And I was excited by that. So we left Ann Arbor. We were living in an apartment in Ann Arbor. We drove east on Route 80, got to Tarrytown. And I had about $12,000 to my name because, I just didn't have a lot of cash at that time. I was a just impoverished graduate student for 5 years in Hyde Park. So I had to spend literally everything I had to land an apartment in Tarrytown because it's really greater New York and it's really expensive. And I was pretty much down to nothing. I still had a credit card, so we were going to stay at the Tarrytown Hilton that night, and that was okay. But right now, I just wanted to kind of cut back on my credit card expenditures because that was going through the roof. And so my wife, Mitsuko, and I and our daughter, Emma, who was then 2 years old, were parked in front of the Howard Johnson's Diner, which is right across from the old Tappan Zee Bridge, now the Mario Cuomo Bridge. And it's now, by the way, it's a Honda dealership. They tore it down. But we were there, and Mitsuko said to me, "We need to pray for $100." And I said, "Okay, let's try." And so she did this really deep prayer that somehow or another we would get $100 and be able to get through the day, get to the diner, and just do a few things. And we had a secondhand blue Datsun Sentra. Okay, so we're there. We are in the parking lot, and I didn't give a damn about this car because it was all nicked up and everything. And so my wife said that she felt this little tap on the car, and she wondered if someone hit us. And I said, "No, Mitsuko, no." So we interrupted the prayer. And she said, "No, you've got to get out and see." So I got out of the car, and it's sort of noonish, and it's pretty bright out. And it's because it's late summer and it's sort of mid-August basically. And I look out and there's this big guy who was maybe 6'4", 6'5", very rotund, African-American, looked like he was kind of a Pentecostal type person wearing a white suit and a white hat. And he looked at me and I looked at him and he said, "Oh, let's not do this through insurance. Let's just settle it." And he opened up his wallet and he pulled out a $100 bill and he said, "Well, and I said, "Sir, you are an answer to a prayer."
Wow.
and I had my $100, and then we went I thanked him very much, and then we went into the Howard Johnson's, and we got all kinds of French fries, and then milkshakes for Emma, and all that kind of bad stuff. And we had a nice afternoon. And the next day, I actually got paid. I got my first paycheck, and a couple of days later, we moved into our apartment on Main Street in Tarrytown.
The power of prayer, right there.
Yeah.
And as we know, not all prayers are answered so immediately or so directly.
Yeah. Well, that was what was so shocking about that, because I was talking about it with my wife, and we always smile about it, but it just shows you this. I think sometimes this infinite mind of unlimited love is very playful, and it kind of sets us up for these sorts of events, kind of to be mirthful.
Yeah, that's fun. That's really fun. Well, thank you for sharing that. So, okay, let's see. I had just a few other ideas that you raised in the book, but I'm feeling like we ought to transition here soon. I'm really curious what you talk about, and I realize we probably don't have time in this interview for all this, but maybe I'll just rattle off a few things, and if any of it feels like it's worth talking about or something you want to talk about, you can tell me. I love what you say about names of God. that it's fine to give names to people or dogs, but not so good to give names to God.
Yeah.
And I love your term. I'd never heard this before. Carefrontation.
Yeah.
Like, what is it? How do we do it? Why would we want to? And then I also want to ask, I know we didn't talk about, man, the interaction with Sir John Templeton or what that led to. So there's so much, but in the interest of time, is there any of that you feel you want to touch on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, like, you got all these religions, and to me, it's all like a GPS. Sometimes you load your GPS for, you want to get to San Francisco, and you're going to get somehow off the course, and you're going to take different turns and different twists. But if you just stick with it, eventually you'll get to San Francisco, sometimes with some pretty crazy detours. And that's to me, the whole thing about religions is that they're all trying to get us to the same place, which is this realization of an infinite mind of unlimited love. And it doesn't really matter too much how we get there, because what's really important is that we do get there. And so, I'm not too much into names of God, and that sort of touches on that question. The thing about, what was the next one?
So the names of God, Carefrontation.
Oh yeah. So when I was at Case Western in the med school, one of our graduates was a guy named M. Scott Peck, who'd written a book called The Road Less Traveled, and he was living in Connecticut at the time. And because I was on the faculty there and interested in psychiatry, we got to know each other. We met each other at a reunion there when I was doing a talk, and we actually, in correspondence, I actually have all that correspondence with him right up here in my desk. We wanted a word together that was better than confrontation. And so we came up with carefrontation. And that's a chapter in the book I did, Why Good Things Happen to Good People. Because, confrontation is like, loggerheads, but carefrontation means with deep empathy and kindness and loyalty, you're going to help someone kind of live more consistently with their values. And that's, for Aristotle, that was the highest form of friendship. That's the kind of friend you want. Someone who's going to make sure you don't veer off course and get in incredible trouble, Yeah.
So, I love that term, by the way, in coaching, and I train coaches. And the way I phrase what I'm hearing in carefrontation is to be a stand for one's greatness.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the highest form of friendship, you want the people around you who will be sure that you do stand for your greatness and that you have that kind of integrity.
Yeah.
And that's why you want them on your board of trustees. You want them, and so Aristotle said that your best friends aren't the people you hang out and party with or whatever, but they're really the people that keep you on the right pathway and are concerned in a gentle way sometimes that you stick with your pathway.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And another guest and friend of mine, Dr. Tasha Urek, she has a term that's along these lines of a loving critic, where if you, for example, if you share something you've written with someone who loves you, all you'll get is the, yeah, it's wonderful. If you share it with somebody who's, only critical of you, they'll point out all the flaws, but not necessarily in a way that will really help you improve the work. But finding somebody, I love that. I didn't know that about Aristotle, saying that that's the highest form of friendship. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing about, so in Why Good Things Happen to Good People, the definition of love is when the happiness and security of another is as real or meaningful to you as your own. But it can take so many expressions. So sometimes people need carefrontation, Sometimes they need compassion. Sometimes they need forgiveness. So we always have to be thinking like wheels of love, in the book, God and love, how do the people we encounter need us to manifest love? And it can take very different forms, but carefrontation is an important form.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I also love the way you talk about this when you say, in the end, one must skillfully engage in carefrontation or live a life of avoidance. That we can just kind of live around these things, but then we're far below our potential, the potential of the ones we love, the greatness in them, like all this.
Yeah, that whole avoidance thing, it only gets you so far.
Yeah, for sure.
And as far as Sir John goes, so Route 80 is about meeting amazing people and responding to them. And I didn't make my life. I've had some successes, but I've responded to people. And I met Sir John in 1989 or so. And I was able to work alongside of him as he was developing all these institutes on gratitude and forgiveness all over the world. And I was on his board for 6 years, the Templeton Foundation. But what was so interesting, I was sitting in my office at Case Western, and it was, I guess, June of 2001, and I got a fax from Sir John, who lived in Lyford in Nassau. He didn't email; he was kind of too old for emailing, but he thought the fax was a great invention. So I got a lot of faxes from him, and one morning I got a fax that said, "Stephen, we need to start an institute that takes the highest methodologies of science and applies them not just to human love, but to the love that made humans. In other words, not just to our human emotions of love, but to this sense of a kind of overarching presence of love in the universe." And I faxed back, "Sir John, what should we call it?" And he said, "The Institute for Research on Unlimited Love." Those were his words. And he'd written a little book by that title. And I faxed back, "Sir John," because I was having a little trepidation since I was in a materialistic environment, "maybe we should call it the Institute for Creative Altruism." And he shot back, "No, I think unlimited love up to $8.9 million. And I think I did what you would have done, Brian. I said, "Sir John, I love that language. It jumps right off the page." You know? And we were able to study, fund all kinds of things with ions and all, just all these wonderful organizations, and not just look at human empathy and compassion, although we did a lot of that, but he also wanted to study these feelings of being invaded almost by a higher power of love. And people do have these experiences, and they find themselves able to love people in powerful ways. They may not even know them, they may not be friends, but they just feel that that person's life in and of itself is of inestimable value.
Yeah. That's one thing that selfishly I want a bigger experience of for myself. And I wish that everyone had that experience. And, I think about something I heard President Jim Kim, president of the World Bank, say, where, his organization employs 3,000 PhDs, a lot of researchers and scholars and things like this. And he said that it attracts a lot of people. The way he phrases it, he says they love humanity, but they hate people.
Yeah.
I was like, that's really interesting. And I think if they were instead motivated by this sense of connection to unlimited love,
Yeah.
how different that would be. So where I'm going with all this is, how can we cultivate that for ourselves?
Yeah. Love of humanity is an abstraction in a sense, love humanity but hate people. Charles Dickens talked a lot about that. Camus talked a lot about that. Basically, this person right in front of me with all of his or her flaws and imperfections. That's why I love the spirituality of imperfection, the sort of the AA thing, that we just have to accept people, not just tolerate them, but accept them and love them as they are first. But so I have a story, I'm sitting here right now talking to you from my medical school office. And several years ago, there was a wonderful Korean American medical student, second year student, who had grown up really poor in Flushing, Queens, and she was struggling being a student because everyone else was a little better off than she was, and she just didn't feel. And she grew up in a very much a sort of a storefront Korean evangelical church, So it was a cultural thing, and she came by, and she was really, really struggling. I could see it. But I had this really busy schedule all afternoon, and I had to see one person after another. And I said, "Look, drop me an email and we'll talk next week." So then I'm sitting here right in this chair, and I felt this incredible warmth, energy. I can't even explain it because it's not rational, but I felt it. And I looked over my right shoulder because that's where it seemed to be coming from. And of course, there was nothing there. But it was so astonishing and so uplifting that I immediately realized I have to take care of this student right now, and I have to cancel everything. So I just, said, "Wait here." I canceled all these appointments for the afternoon, and I spent the afternoon with her. And she eventually did take a year off, but I would go into Flushing to this Korean tea house, ginseng tea and bulgogi and stuff. And she she kept a journal. She did a special research project under me on medical compassion. and she got back into medical school, and she's doing really great now. But I've always looked after her because I felt that somehow, I mean, when she came in the door, she was just, one out of, there's 450 medical students floating around here, but and it was easy for me to kind of overlook her. But because I felt this love, which was not from me, it was really like being invaded. And it was sort of irresistible too. I didn't want to resist it, but I felt invaded by it. And I always remembered it. And it was a profound experience. And I guess that's why I'm talking about it right now, because it's like it just happened a minute ago.
Hmm.
So that's what I mean by higher love, not human love, but the love that made humans, that can work through us, and bring us to these kinds of insights about the incredible love and value that God has for everyone without exception.
That's really beautiful. And what I'm hearing in that is, it sounds to me like in this case, you were able to express love through awareness. You were aware of this feeling, of this sensation. You were not only aware of it, but then you responded because of it, and you took action and things like this. I know there's not one single answer. It's not like a silver bullet or, the skeleton key probably that unlocks this. But for those of us who maybe, and I'll put myself in this category, sometimes struggle as a parent, to be patient, to be kind, to be loving. I had this experience this week when just yesterday that I had a speaking opportunity. And afterward, I had, in the haste of an unfamiliar venue and the end and greeting people and things, I misplaced my bag. And when I called my assistant to say, do you know where it is? And she started to tell me she didn't, but she had these other things of mine. And I said, that's what I needed to know, is you don't have it, and I was very curt. And afterward, I reflected on, well, I don't think that was very loving. So having made the decision already to be a kind and loving and compassionate person, but not always expressing it in the moment, what do you say, to me or to others who, in whatever venue, leading people, parenting, in their family relations, how can we as a practice cultivate and express more love more often, more easily?
Yeah. Well, again, first of all, that's a great anecdote. Those who make no mistakes make nothing. Human nature is a mixed bag. Human love can reverse itself. It can be myopic. It can be unwise. It can flicker on and off.
It's very conditional.
It tends to be conditional. It really does. And, we love our kids until they start talking back.
Yeah, until they have their own ideas and identity.
Yeah, they have their own ideas.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. But,
Yeah.
but the thing is that, we do the best we can. So what I do, I have to have a spiritual practice, because I'm just like anybody else. If I don't, I can easily fall full chested on the horn on the way to work because some guy in front of me had the audacity to slow down at a yellow light. I mean, I'm perfectly capable of doing that, because I'm in the world, in this physical world, and there are all kinds of pressures, and I'm locked into chronological time, and I've got to get from point A to point B. And, the Japanese symbol for busy is a heart with a slash through it, meaning no heart. And so, we're just so much caught up in the pressures of this world in an age of incredible anxiety. It's amazing that we don't implode more than we do, although a lot of people do implode. And so I have to get up every morning about 5:00, and I do that because the Jewish rabbis, the Kabbalistic people, said that God is beyond time and space. And so when you get up in the morning early, you kind of feel like you're beyond time. You're just coming out of sleep, and you're not locked into, okay, I got to be here at 8:39. And then you have a feeling of placelessness, because you could be in Cleveland, you could be in Utah, you could be,
in the hinterlands of the universe.
You could be anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's this sense of proximity to the divine. And if you meditate and pray early on, before the world starts getting disruptive and full of chaos and nastiness, and I do a kind of dress rehearsal, because I sort of know who the key people I'm going to meet over the course of the day are. I write my schedule still down in a book,
Old school.
Yeah, old school. And I just kind of go through it, and I think about the different forms of love that the people I'm going to encounter are going to need over the course of the day, and
That's a beautiful thing.
yeah, that's what I do. So I know if, like, one of my colleagues is having a hard time with the grant, so I'm going to spend 15 minutes with them talking about creativity and maybe a solution. Or I know that somebody's, their spouse has left them and they need someone to sit and just listen and also express loyalty. Or, it could be care for, it could be any of these things, but I try to project that, and I come into my own inner light, my own inner peace. I visualize a little bit, I set the day up. And that way, when all these crazy things happen, and I have crazy pressures too, because this is a big academic medical center and it's almost completely unwieldy, I manage to stay centered because I do something early in the morning. And some people say, well, okay, well, how about, you know, at noon or 2 in the afternoon? But, the Kabbalistic folks said, well, do it early because that's deeper somehow.
Yeah. No, I love that. And a few months ago, I interviewed Hal Elrod, who wrote The Miracle Morning.
Mm.
And he talks about how, many of us might not think of ourselves as morning people, but we ultimately can change that with a decision. And so I've endeavored to live that since I was inspired by Hal. And just what you're saying, I love the way you described it about cultivating this sense of spacelessness and timelessness.
Mhm.
And now I wake up usually a couple hours before my first scheduled thing.
Mhm.
And I love when it's quiet and it's still dark, and it's like that time doesn't matter. It's really beautiful.
It's the most precious time of the day,
Yeah.
and and so it's still possible, that you'll get edgy and lose it, and scream at somebody. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a wonderful book called, what is it called? Scream Free Parenting, and it points out that
Oh,
even though 100% of parents don't want to scream at their kids, 98% of them do
yeah.
at some
Yeah.
point.
At
If
least
you really
sometime.
fess up
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah, for sure.
But
Guilty.
so we do that.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. And I know, it's a journey for sure. And by the way, I love what you say. I just want to say this before we transition. I love what you say. It's simple to be happy, but
Yeah,
hard to be simple.
yeah, that's it.
And I think maybe loving is the same way. It's simple
Yeah,
to love, but sometimes hard to be simple.
yeah.
So, okay. Well, then with that, let's transition to the enlightening lightning round. I'll ask these questions and then do my best to step out of the way. I might
Okay.
follow up a little bit on an answer here or there.
So pretty quick responses.
Well, you're welcome to take whatever
Okay.
you want, but for me, I will just ask it and we'll
Okay.
keep moving. And then if time allows, we'll turn our conversation to a bit of discussion about creativity and writing
Okay. Good.
and then be done.
Good. Okay.
Okay, awesome. So the enlightening lightning round. Your first question. Please complete the following sentence with something other than a box of chocolates. Life is like a,
Life is like a journey where you don't make your own way and you have to be open to surprises, but keep your faith in the journey because there's always something out in front of you that you can't see that's waiting for you to arrive. And that's synchronicity.
love it. Okay, thank you. Number two, what is something at which you wish you were better?
I wish I was better. This is a tough one. I wish I was better at sometimes celebrating people's lives. I mean, that's one area. It's in the book, celebration, grateful celebration is an important expression of love. But sometimes, I'm so caught up in work or sometimes so caught up in writing or speaking in various places. And, as I look back on my life, my kids are now in their 20s and they're growing up. And I must say that I look back, I wish that at certain points I had been there a little more reliably just to celebrate some things in their lives, because I was there pretty well, but not maybe as well as I could have been. And the thing is that now that I'm older, I can never get that back, and so I think we have to be really careful as parents that we don't get the wrong idea of success in mind, that, it's somehow all about work and prestige and a better institution and better pay and whatever.
Yeah.
But we really need to integrate well with our loved ones who really depend on us, and we need to celebrate their lives. And it's easy to forget that. We're pulled away from it, but it's never worth forgetting.
That's great. And by the way, I suspect you're being hard on yourself. I suspect you're actually pretty good at this.
I don't know.
Better than you know, but just a suspicion. We've known each other for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Okay, number 3. If you were required every day for the rest of your life to wear a T-shirt with a slogan on it, or a phrase or a saying or a quote or a quip, what would the shirt say?
It would say, "Those who make no mistakes make nothing." That would be it, because, being in a medical center, people make mistakes all the time on patients, for example, and sometimes the results are pretty significant. And the real issue is, how do they process that? It's not so much, how do you apologize to a patient, or, how do you handle this, and, yada, 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 where does legal risk management come in? But it's just that people feel so badly about it, and sometimes they even leave medicine or nursing. There was a nurse in New York City 4 or 5 years ago who made a mistake in a neonatal intensive care unit that resulted in the death of an infant that was otherwise avoidable. And she had no place to go with it, no place to process it. And so a couple of months later, she killed herself. All right. So, I just think that people need to understand, you know, those who make no mistakes make nothing. And we all make mistakes, and we always will make mistakes. And we don't need to beat ourselves up over it.
Question number 4. What book, other than one of your own, have you gifted or recommended most often?
Oh, wow. That's really tough. There's a book by Matthew Ricard on altruism that I really like, and I have our graduate students read it, because he's a Buddhist monk and very close to His Holiness, and he's written this incredible book that's like a magnum opus. Really, it's about kindness and spirituality. He calls it altruism because that's easier to get away with, but it is a beautiful book, and he's a great exemplar. And I also give away a book by a guy who was a very close friend of mine, Jean Vanier, who founded L'Arche, these wonderful homes for people with cognitive disabilities. He wrote a book called Becoming Human. So those are books that I recommend to people.
So the one by Matthew Ricard, Happiness, A Guide to Developing Life's Most Important Skill.
Well, he wrote a book on happiness.
Oh, it is altruism, the power of compassion to change yourself in the world.
Yeah. And it's all about how, you really get the happiness in a meaningful way by being generative and kind and caring. And he's a pretty exemplary individual. I saw him. He came to the World Science Festival in New York a couple of years ago. We always talk. When he was writing this book, I was floating him PDFs because he lives in Nepal in a monastery.
Wow.
And so, I was floating him all these PDFs, and he actually acknowledges that in the book.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And then, will you tell me, I apologize, I was looking that book on Amazon, and I missed that second one that you mentioned.
Oh, Jean Vanier, Vanier. He won the Templeton Prize about 5 years ago. Jean, Jean Vanier, Becoming Human.
Wow.
Beautiful book. And I knew him for quite a long time, and actually founded several L'Arche centers in the United States, including L'Arche, Long Island, but also a couple in Cleveland. And there are these beautiful homes where the whole basis of interaction with these folks with cognitive developmental disabilities is love and spirituality. And they do amazing things. And he was a great, great human being. He died a year ago, very sadly, up in north of Paris.
Yeah, those books, I'd never heard of either of those. I keep thinking like a big part of my life's work is about books and writing, and I haven't got to the end of the list yet. I still hear about books I haven't heard of.
There is no end.
Yeah, thank you for that. Those look amazing. Okay, fantastic. Staying on track. Okay, question number 5. So you travel a ton. What's one travel hack, meaning something you do or something you take with you when you travel to make your travel less painful or more enjoyable?
Oh, okay. I have a book. So when I get up early in the morning, I have new thought tendencies. I mean, I kind of believe in clearly writing out your most meaningful visions and dreams and hopes and aspirations in oneness with the divine mind, in these kinds of quiet morning moments. So I have a little book, and I bring it on the airplanes with me, and I don't read newspapers or lots of other things. I just sort of dwell on the book, and there's a lot of names of people I pray for and I know, and so I sometimes just try to envision them and project love, and I use my travel time to do that, and I'm
Wow,
pretty consistent about it.
that's beautiful. Is it like a Moleskine notebook or?
Well, I mean, I have different. I replace it quite frequently because I get more refined and I try to be more and more precise. But sometimes I just use those sort of mold ones, and
Oh yeah.
there are different makes. I picked one up at CVS the other day, and I'm redoing it. But actually, when I rewrite, it's about 12 pages long.
Hmm.
But when I write it and rewrite it, I internalize it better,
Yeah.
and I even try to do sort of non-local viewing. I try to think about all these people. There are probably 100 names in there, and when I'm traveling, I can take the time and I can just really think about their situation and connect with them. At least I believe at a spiritual level.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that. I will say, I've heard some common answers to that question, but no one has yet given that one. And I suspect no one else will.
Okay.
So I really, really appreciate that. Okay. Number 6. What's one thing you've started or stopped doing in order to live or age well?
To age well, I cut carbs, cut sugar pretty well, and I've lost a few pounds. I have to be careful about weight.
Well,
That's
especially if you're working in the Center for Preventive Medicine.
Yeah, I do. You're absolutely true, because you have to set some kind of a decent example. But, now that I've gotten somewhat older, I really have so much more on Route 80. I mean, the book ends when we actually, the website to the Institute got hacked by ISIS. And as a result of that, we were able to fill the entire UN headquarters with young people from all over the globe who won essay contests on how they have pushed back against peer pressure to hate anybody who didn't just believe what they believed. And so it kind of ends there. But that was 2016, August of 2016. And there's a whole lot more of Route 80 to come. And so, you know, and I love Route 80. I mean, I love the Delaware Water Gap. I love to go out there. It's like an hour and a half from the George Washington Bridge, and you're just breaking over the Delaware River, and you see that's where the Appalachian Trail cuts through. So I got too much to do on Route 80 to get really unhealthy.
Yeah, for sure. You got a lot of good years ahead of you.
Yeah.
That's great. Question number 7. What's one thing you wish every American knew?
I wish everyone knew that it's no good to demonize people you disagree with. It's no good. And that's happening too much now. Good, sincere people have different political points of view. And, you have to be able to still sit and have a cup of tea together and be caring and be attentive. And I don't think there's much of an answer right now for the fragmentation of our society coming out of politics or any place other than a kind of spiritual renaissance. And I think that's happening. I think that just having this conversation is very powerful, but these things are happening again and again. And there are more and more people who are just saying, you know, enough is enough, and let's just reach inside. By the way, I was okay with Marianne Williamson running for the Democratic Party,
Yeah.
because I mean, miracle. I mean, a lot of people kind of laughed at her. What's this love business? But I think it's okay to have people like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely a change in conversation.
Yeah,
And I love too, one thing that I learned from this book, where you give later in the book the etymology of the word respect.
yeah, respectara.
Yeah, to look again. right?
Yeah,
To
it comes from
relook.
just like you wear glasses, spectacles, so to look more deeply, to look again, and that's what we need to do because people, everyone has a different history, a different background, and they have reasons for thinking and feeling and having the opinions they do, and so sometimes it's nice to just kind of be respectful.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know?
For sure. Yeah. Okay. Question number 8. Question number 8 is, what's the most important or useful advice you've ever learned and successfully applied about making relationships work? And maybe intimate or, marriage, intimate relationships or marriage.
Yeah, well, I've been married for 37 years. That's a while. I know this will shock you, but I think you have to realize that you you never marry the right person. I know this is a bad thing to say,
Well,
but
this is that theme of spirituality of imperfection.
yeah, of imperfection. I mean, if I was a perfectionist, my wife would have left me 10 times years ago, and I probably would have walked out the door. My grandfather, by the way, had been married to Emily Post, who wrote the etiquette books,
Oh,
and he
yes.
and he stepped out on her because there was this beautiful Broadway actress, and they had an affair, and she turned out to be my grandmother. But
Wow.
but I do believe in loyalty. I mean, to me, sticking with people is an expression of love because there's so much insecurity, and when you really look at the literature, that when people can't find security in relationships where they're going from one person to another to another to another, it really is devastating for them psychologically. And then sometimes you think someone's not quite perfect, and then you're looking elsewhere, and lo and behold, you'll learn pretty quickly that that next person isn't perfect either.
Yeah, the grass is not greener,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And by the way, sorry to jump in here. And one thing you said in the book that I jotted down maybe 20 sentences that really hit me, and one of them, to the point you're making now, loyalty. I had to read this a couple times. Loyalty to the people God brings your way is all you really have to find your destiny.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. That's true.
It's like, wow, that's
Yeah.
pretty amazing.
Yeah, so I'm loyal, and I'm loyal in my book. In my book, I have pictures of my kids, and I talk, and I have some keywords, kindness, celebration, affirmation, but I also have loyalty, and next to it I have a dollar sign because I have a daughter in L.A. I have a son who works in the World Trade Center, but sometimes they might, I mean, my daughter was working with a company, and suddenly, like some corporate, this is why people are mad at corporate America, a whole wing will just get cut out, and they'll be told, clear out your desk by 2:00 and don't come back. I mean, that's corporate
Yeah,
America.
yeah,
That's so different than Japan, where they have loyalty to their workers. I think a lot of reasons why so many people have gotten kind of mad at capitalism is because of that practice. I think we need more loyalty in the corporate space, in our
yeah,
marriages, between parents and children. We just need more loyalty,
yeah,
and it's so important because people, they have to have attachments that they can count on, you know.
yeah, for sure. Man, I was hoping you just have like this one simple trick. No, but I think that's a deep insight. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
And I'm glad to know that even after 37 years of marriage, like, okay,
we do okay. We do
yeah,
okay.
yeah, that's
you
great.
know.
That's good. Okay. Next question coming down the stretch on the enlightening lightning round. Question number 8. Aside from compound interest, what's the most important or useful thing you've ever learned about money, or what's something you're sure to never do or always do with it?
Be careful of foolish investments. I made a foolish investment once upon a time. I didn't lose my shirt. I lost $40,000.
What you invest in?
Well, a friend of mine was starting a company, and it looked really good, and he could sell that thing like P.T. Barnum. And I just thought, hey, here's an opportunity of a lifetime. And it turned out the whole thing was bogus.
Wow.
So I learned that I have to be very careful as an investor and think everything through, and not try to do wild things, but just be sort of consistent over time. So I'm a conservative investor. I also live simply. I believe in simplicity. So I don't spend a lot of money, and you have to live simple and have some thrift, because if you don't, then you can't give. You don't have anything to help, to give away to the people you love, to give to a special cause or something along those lines.
Yeah. That makes me think about the Rockefellers and how when in the second generation, after the wealth had been created, that the family and John engaged in philanthropy, that was when the business really took off, was when the giving started.
Yeah. Yeah. The 10% tithing kind of thing for them, they sort of applied in the real world. And it's absolutely the case that there's a kind of a dynamic there. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah.
But I give, so when medical students, I don't know if this is exactly proper, but the bureaucracy in the State University of New York system is so big, so extensive for reimbursement. You have to wait like months and months and months. So I'm constantly sort of slipping people $50 or $80 to cover costs for art tools for an event they're having. And I'm happy to do it.
If people want to connect with you or they want to learn more from you, what would you have them do?
Well, I have a website, which is Stephen with a PH, G, like Gary, Post, POST.com. And then I have the Institute website, which is unlimitedloveinstitute.org. But actually, people are free to email me. They just email me directly. My email is on the website, post@stephengpost.com. And I will respond. It may take me for a couple of days, but I do respond. And I get a lot of sometimes almost pastoral type emails, and I try to give it an honest response, And
what do you mean by that? Pastoral? Is this kind of long and?
Well, just people who are people who are just struggling with things, and
like a pastor would get.
Yeah. And it's hard for them to believe anymore that there's such a thing as a cherishing higher presence in the universe, or that synchronicity is even possible because they've been so beat up.
Yeah.
And so I sometimes take a lot of time to respond to those kinds of concerns because they're serious. I don't want to be Pollyannish.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's a lot of suffering going on for sure.
Yeah.
And so much of it self-inflicted, not to diminish it, but I speak from my first life.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So much of it is self-inflicted. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. In fact, how did Seneca put it? The greatest griefs we cause ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and that, by the way, was one thing I loved about your book was you include in God and Love on Route 80 many quotations that I was not familiar with, and I'm a collector of quotations, and I feel like you have some really great ones in here. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, those are really pit stops because there's all these episodes of Synchronicity, but then this page or two where you get a picture of, there's all kinds of pictures in there.
Yeah.
Even in the Mercedes 190, there's a picture of me standing in front of it in the driveway, as a kid.
Fun.
And the Cajon zone's a picture of a Cajon zone, and all kinds of things. Then little a few spiritual statements. So it makes it kind of easier to read because you get a break and then you can dig into that stuff.
Yeah. Well, what a gift too. I think you've given your family and posterity who might likely not get a chance to meet you in this lifetime. And it's books like this when I do think, and I asked a publisher once, I said, do you think it's true that everyone has at least one book inside them? And she said, unfortunately. But still, I go around encouraging people to write a book. And I've actually now started making a list of books. And I actually, because I do this podcast, I divide books into authors living and deceased.
Oh. Okay.
And I prioritize living authors because in many cases, hopefully, I still get to talk to them. So I'm really glad that you wrote this and we were able to have this conversation.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you were engaged by it.
Yeah, I was very, very much. I took a lot away. Okay, so the final section, we've left a few minutes, and this part in particular, again, is for those who are also engaged in or who want to engage with, maybe they flirt with the idea of writing their own book, translating that from an idea or a mere intention into a reality. For my first 30 interviews or so, I had kind of a standard question set here, and I pretty much threw it away. So knowing that that's who we're talking to or endeavoring to serve, and that's what the point of the conversation is, where would you like to start?
Well, I like to encourage people to write from life. I mean, I think people, they don't write because, they're not scholars maybe, Maybe they don't think they have enough education or accomplishment. They're not famous or anything like that. But actually, everybody can write from life, and everybody's life has depth and narrative, and there's some way that you can look at it that will attract readers from every kind of background, because there is a story there, and you can tell it. And a lot of the most successful books have been written that way, just, people really reflecting about even relatively simple experiences they've had in their lives. There was a best-selling book a few years ago about Shaker Heights, Ohio, where we raised our kids, and it's just somebody who grew up in Shaker, and they were writing about the details of Shaker Heights and how the garbage people would actually drive these little carts up to the back of the driveway and all that stuff. And it was a really successful book.
Wow.
So don't be afraid to write from life, and you don't have to rush it. Just kind of start. Like I started Route 80 in 2000, just little vignettes, because I'd had some of these experiences, and then I stopped writing it. It was actually part of an electronic newsletter for the Institute. And then about 4 years ago, I came back to it, and I decided, there's enough here to really write a meaningful journey story, and especially after the UN was kind of a crescendo event. So it had some momentum. But sometimes books are sort of writing themselves over time. So you can let your pen rest, but you're still in the middle of a big writing project because your life flows on.
So that means this book, understanding what you said, you took a break and let your pen rest and that kind of thing. But that means this book took you nearly 20 years.
Well, kind of, but the thing is, I had to build this center at Stony Brook, and I write a lot of articles for medical journals, JAMA, New England Journal, all these kinds of places, and I sort of enjoy that because that's meaningful too. But this was a special book because it was the spiritual side of my life, and I sometimes it's helpful. I've had some accomplishment over the years. I've been very fortunate and blessed, but I wanted to reveal sort of the inner dynamic of that, which really comes from this dream experience and the course of my life and trying to stay on Route 80. And so I'm happy I wrote it. I really am happy. I smile about it, and I feel comfortable.
Yeah. And that really just affirms my belief that we all want to have run a marathon, but we don't want to run a marathon. Like it's easy. It's great to smile when it's done, but in many cases, the creative process is agony. I think. I don't know if that's your experience, but that's certainly mine, that maybe our writing, the quality of it improves, but the act of it never seems to get any less painful or easily. Although when we hit the flow state, then it's like, boom, then it's beautiful.
Yeah. And that's how it is from when I'm doing well, that's how I feel. I mean, every day, I have like 200 emails. And so I'm so fragmented, and I'm just quickly responding to these emails left and right. If I go up to the Poconos, and I could do 24/7 for a week and just write a single reflective essay, and I would feel completely energized because it's focused and it's meaningful. So that's the thing is, you want to be in that kind of a flow state. And this book got better. The writing of it got better. In the end, I was trying to write it as a kind of almost like a spiritual classic in a way. And I wanted to create that kind of tone in the way I was using language and turning phrases and things like that.
Yeah. And I think that comes through. In fact, that brings to mind a question I did want to ask you, and I wonder if it might open up anything for someone listening. But you made the decision to write this book largely in third person.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's all third person.
Tell me about that. Why did you do that?
So when I was at St. Paul's, and I ran cross country, and we had a cross country coach named Senor Ordonez. And this guy, he was Cuban, by the way, originally, and he'd come to St. Paul's, and he was a history teacher. And he smoked non-filter Players cigarettes. So he'd be running through the woods, with a group of 15 or 20 people like myself, and there was this place called Turkey Hill, up the hill, and he would just stay down at the base, chain smoking this stuff, and He wasn't a great example, but he called everybody the boy something, like the boy Smith, the boy Jones, the boy Robertson. And my brother had gone there before me. So he was already the boy Post. So I became known as the boy, you know, and because, there couldn't be two boy Posts. So I was just the boy. And people started referring to me as the boy. And so that's how I got into that. But I also found it really enjoyable because when I wrote that way and sort of acculturated to that in Route 80, it just kept me free of having to write about me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
And it also gave me a little bit of a distance on it. So I was kind of entertained by, oh, look what the boy is doing, And also, it wasn't with the boy. It wasn't so much just a book about me, Stephen G. Post, my memoir, but it was just about the boy, and anybody could be the boy in a way, So it invites anybody to sort of get in touch with that child within, if you will. And so I really liked writing it that way. Some people, I know it's a little bit off-putting for them and they have to get used to it, but most people, they kind of get into it, they kind of like it.
Yeah, it definitely contributed for me to the narrative quality of the writing. Yeah. And that to me is just an example. I mean, as a writer, there are so many considerations to make, from word choice to active and passive voice and, show, don't tell, and like all these different things. And this is one that if somebody's, feeling stuck somehow, I wonder if, because it had never really occurred to me to try this in a piece of nonfiction, to write it autobiographically in the third person.
Yeah.
But that's kind of an interesting choice. So maybe that will also open up something for somebody listening.
Yeah, it worked pretty well for me.
Yeah, that's great. And it worked well for me as a reader.
Thank you. Good. Okay,
yeah.
Great.
Okay, let me ask you this. I'll ask you this way. What are the qualities of a great sentence, and how can we write more of them?
Boy, that's a really hard question. To me, a great sentence is pretty simple. I don't use a lot of colons and semicolons. I like to break up sentences. I like them to be very easily managed. I like a turn of phrase, that is memorable. And I like them to have a sort of melodic quality.
How do you know when they do?
Well, it's kind of like playing a piece of music. For me, it's like phrasing a piece of music. You want to have a good piece of music has fast and slow and high and low and sound and no sound and all those kinds of things. And so a really good sentence is not complicated, but it has that kind of musicality to it. And that's what I aspire to, but it's not easy. And it's for a certain, if I was doing more technical writing, for a journal, I wouldn't worry too much about that. But I tend to try to write musically because I feel as though if that quality is there, it's going to be much easier on my reader.
Yeah.
More enjoyable.
I think so. I really appreciate that answer. So I think the final question, well, I am interested also. I do want to just turn to at least one question about marketing and promotion, maybe pitching a book, this kind of thing, because I think as writers, it's easy for us to see the completion of the manuscript as the finish line. Mm-hmm. But I think also when we think of ourselves as writers, most of us are not truly satisfied if all we do is complete something, but no one ever reads it or benefits from it.
Oh, yeah.
I want to just ask that question, and then I'll ask my final question about the writing, the act of writing again. But what have you learned about marketing and promoting a book, actually getting it into people's hands, that has made a difference for you, or might make a difference for people listening?
Well, you have to be willing to put some resources into it. Find a good publicist. Some of them are better than others.
How do you know when you've got a good one, or which ones to avoid?
You have to experiment a little bit, and it's not easy. I mean, Eileen Dunny, who I work with, just knows so many great people. I'm astonished at the quality of interviews that she pulls together. People like yourself, frankly, but
thank you.
But others, I mean, people who really have a commitment to this and a vision, and you have that obviously, and it's been evident since we first encountered one another 2 hours ago. But it's okay. You want to have a good agent. You don't have to put yourself in hock, but that's worth doing. And the other thing is be generous with your book. If you really feel comfortable and confident in it, don't be afraid to give it away. That's okay. It can allow people to get excited by it, and then they'll buy copies for 5 friends at Thanksgiving or something like that.
Yeah.
So this book, I mean, Why Good Things Happen was I think that sold about 70,000 copies. It was pretty successful. This one's catching on. It's a completely different genre, because it's not, this is really a spiritual journey book. And I'm so glad to have written it. And I didn't write it necessarily to be, a #1 bestseller. I wrote it because I wanted to allow people to transform their lives. That's why I wrote it, and nice thing, I was looking at it's like 25 reviews on Amazon now, but almost everyone says the same thing. This was transformative, and that's really all I care about. And I didn't have to get technical, because Larry Dossey was kind enough to write the foreword, so he filled in all the stuff about one mind and premonition.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome. And Chopra blurbing, that never hurts.
Yeah.
Deepak Chopra on the cover there too.
Yeah, so they were really generous, and I guess they just like the book. They like the dream a lot.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. We forget, and we can remember. We can remember. What is it that is important for people to remember when they're in the belly of the snake, so to speak, when they're in the tunnel, when they're birthing the book? What is it that's important for them to remember? If there's an idea, a saying, a piece of encouragement, something like that, what do you leave people with when it comes to completing the book?
We rise by lifting others. That's it. I mean, that's how I am anyway. I mean, I always write because there's some constituency. I've written a lot of things about the deeply forgetful, about Alzheimer's folks, for caregivers. There's some constituency that I'm writing for, and I can see them. I can even have pictures of them in my mind, including Route 80. Route 80 is for all these wonderful folks who are just so caught up in modern materialism that they can't see a way out of it. So I wrote it with the heart of service. So I think you want to know who you're benefiting, and you want to write in a way that's somewhat unique. You want to be innovative, and you want to be true to yourself. But don't just write. I don't. Other people may be different. I don't write just to write. I mean, I write because there's something I want to bring for others.
Yeah, that's evident. That's great. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for sharing of your time and your experience and your wisdom with me and with everyone who's listening. I'm really grateful.
Well, you've been fantastic, Brian. And I can't thank you enough for being who you are, being close to the Great Salt Lake, Route 80. That I think we were talking before, when I was coming across the country on Route 80 when I was a young kid, I was like gaga at the Great Lake. I thought, oh my God, there's the Great Salt Lake,
Yeah,
and
a little further than the Salt Flats.
Yeah. I could look over it, and so that was one of my exciting moments on Route 80.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And the final thing here that I'll just share as an expression of my gratitude to you, I've gone on kiva.org and I've made a $100 microloan to an entrepreneur in India, to a woman who will use this money to buy apples and mangoes and expand her fruit shop and improve the quality of life for herself and for her family and ultimately for her community.
Great.
So
that's beautiful.
Yeah, someone named Farjana Banu. So thank you for giving me a reason to do that.
Well, thank you for having me, and I wish you well and blessings. I'm sure you have a very inspired audience. So.
Well, I think I do now, if I didn't before.
All right.
So,
take care.
Despite living in an age where we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before, life isn't working for many people. Whether it's in the developed world, where we're dealing with depression, anxiety, addiction, divorce, jobs we hate, relationships that don't work, or people in the developing world who don't have access to clean water or sanitation or healthcare or education, or who live in conflict zones, there's a lot of people on the planet that life isn't working very well for. If you're one of those people, I invite you to connect with me at goodliving.com. I've created Life's Best Practices Breakthrough Coaching to help you navigate the transitions that we all go through. Whether you've just graduated school, you're going through a divorce, you just got married, you're headed into retirement, you're starting a business, you just lost your job, whatever it is you're facing, I've developed a 36-week course that you go through with me and a community of achievers and seekers who are committed to improving their own lives and the lives of others. So through this online program, you will have the opportunity to go deep into every area of your life, explore life's big questions, create answers for yourself in community, get clarity and accountability. If that's something you're interested to learn about, I invite you to contact me directly at brian@brianmiller.com or by visiting goodliving.com.